Hi, Shoshana.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Once again, I'm Shoshana Mostoller with My Dog is My Home, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Rose, Holly Henning, and Paula Stone. Elizabeth and I will be moderating today's panel called From Listening to Action, Pet Inclusion for Survivors.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Rose. I am a survivor and advocate. I survived 11 years of child abuse to escape to find myself in a 5-year abusive relationship. URI and PALS assisted me with my journey, changing my life from surviving to thriving, giving me a safe space for my whole family, daughter Hazel and cat BB. Welcome to today's panel's discussion. When survivors speak, meaningful changes happen. Women's Advocates, the nation's first shelter for victim survivors of domestic violence, has long been a leader in centering survivor voices in its work. Most recently, their Survivor Advisory Council identified a critical gap in services, the need for pet inclusive shelter options. Women's advocates responded swiftly, forging key partnerships with the Animal Welfare Network in the Twin Cities and committing to integrating the human animal bond into their services. Now, as they prepare to open their first ever fully pet friendly shelter, leaders from Women's Advocates will share how they transform survivor input into concrete action. This panel discussion will explore the power of listening to survivors, the responsibility organizations hold to act on their guidance, and the practical steps taken to make pet inclusion a reality for those fleeing domestic violence. I would like to introduce our panel today. First up, we have Holly Henning, currently serves as the Executive Director of Women's Advocates, a renowned nonprofit that was the first shelter in the nation for victim survivors of domestic violence. Before joining Women's Advocates, Holly spent 15 years at Anda Jung Center, our home, where she ultimately held the position of Associate Director. She led culturally based street outreach. Sorry, my cat is whipping his tail around. She led culturally based street outreach, shelter, and housing programs at the Division of Indian Work. Holly serves on the National Work Group on Safe Housing for American Indian and Alaska Native Survivors of Gender-Based Violence. With the National Indian Women's Resource Center, Holly was pivotal in the advocating for policy changes and driving systems reform related to safe harbor laws in Minnesota. She also played a key role in launching culturally specific safe harbor services for Indigenous victim survivors of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. Holly is a single mother, a survivor of various forms of trauma, and a visual artist. She is a lifelong old style jingle dress dancer and leads a native drum and dance troupe that collaborates with Indian education programs and community organizations across the state to teach youth. She utilizes art to elevate community voice, healing, and advance change. She has been a part of many collaborative arts-based events and mural projects throughout the United States, Canada, Africa, and Mexico. She uses acrylic paint, aerosol paint, traditional Native American art forms, and dance as a personal and political tool to address, explore, and portray contemporary Indigenous struggles. We are also joined today by Paula Stone. Paula has been affiliated with Women's Advocates as a domestic abuse survivor since October 2020. She drove from the northern Minnesota city where she was living at the time and was assisted through Day One and the Joint Shelter Program that was in place in Minnesota during COVID. They assisted her during this time of homelessness, as well as providing aftercare once she was able to move into her own apartment. She has firsthand experience with having to find shelter for her two pet cats at the time, Stella and Penny. Paula has been a member of Women's Advocates Survivor Advisory Council since its inception in 2022. The council is composed of domestic abuse survivors who advise and recommend changes due to their own lived experiences. One of Paula's initial proposals was to find a way for survivors to keep their pets with them when going into shelter. This led to women's advocates collaborating with a local animal shelter where they would find individuals to foster pets of incoming survivors. Later, this led to several shelters and animal shelters developing a program called The Bond Between. The true goal is to start having pet-friendly shelters and not separate pets and their owners from the beginning. This is what has led her to this conference for My Dog is My Home today. Paula works remotely full-time as a scholarship administrator for the Office of Financial Aid, scholarships at the University of Minnesota. She holds a BFA in Visual Arts from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and a Master of Science in Mass Communications from St. Cloud State University. In her free time, she loves to write, paint, and collage, camp, play, games, travel, drink coffee, and connect with others. I have a lot of questions about the Advisory Panel and Animal Welfare Network, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about of women's advocates. Holly, would you like to share your slides now?
Right. Sorry, it took me a second. Bujuanin, Miskatu Swaptanom, Indigena Cause, Gimme Wanabo, Koi Indigena Cause, Makon and Dudam, Ogokin and Dunjaba, Wewe, Wachiana and Dunjaba, Ashke Bigazibing and Dea, Chimi Gwach Miogo. My English name is Holly Henning. And my Ojibwe name translates to Rainwater Woman. My family originates from the Martin Falls Anishinaabe First Nation and the Constance Lake Cree First Nation. Both are located in Northern Ontario, Canada, but I live here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm currently the executive director here at Women's Advocates. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the history of our organization, and then Elizabeth has a few other questions as part of this panel. So our mission is to walk with victim survivors in our community to break the cycle of domestic violence. And just a little bit more about our history. Women's Advocates was started as a collective originally in 1972 after no-fault divorce became legal in the state of Minnesota. This group of like-minded feminists set up a legal hotline to help other women learn how to actually access divorce services. And what they were actually finding was that they started getting calls that many women were actually in abusive situations and in danger, actually. And so this group of women actually started taking survivors into their own homes and trying to help navigate and find resources for folks. And after a while, they realized that that was not a sustainable model for services. And in 1974, the first house was purchased in St. Paul, opening the first domestic violence shelter in the nation. And since that time, we've expanded into 2 additional houses that are all connected here in the Summit Hill neighborhood of St. Paul. And we've expanded and grown our housing stability work, our outreach services, our mental health and chemical health services, and jump-started the Minnesota Pet Coalition, which we're going to get further into. So with that, I will turn it back to you.
All right, Paula, I wanted to ask you some questions about your own personal journey. First, I wanted to ask you, how does an emotional bond with a pet influence a survivor's ability to leave an abusive relationship?
I think for myself, I was in a 16-year marriage, and I think I really didn't realize or understand the abuse until probably a year before I left. And during that time, or over those years, I had 4 pets. I also have 2 daughters, and they left, they graduated, and then I had my pets, and they really were my comfort, confidants, and really were my family. So for me to leave, and I even remember at the time, like, I can't even leave it if I wanted to. I've got four animals. Where am I going to go? How am I going to do this? And I think, and then unfortunately, I mean, 2 of them passed away within 2 years. And then I had my 2 cats, which were Stella and Penny. And they just, again, I was very concerned about where they would go. How am I going to do this? I didn't have anywhere to take them. I really didn't have any close family. Both my adult daughters were out of the state. And so I really didn't have anywhere to take them.
I wanted to ask, what are the most common ways that abusers use pets to exert control or manipulate survivors?
Well, for myself, I just know that my ex, he would often threaten to take them and put them down when I was gone. And so that was, when he first started doing that, that was one of the scariest ways. He did, so it was a way I was constantly on edge, like, oh, I can't have too much hair anywhere, cleaning up, constantly, trying to keep peace that way. So there was no way I was going to leave my cats, because I already knew that would be used against me. And I had many years of knowing this, and I really had just a day to decide. I remember there was one day in particular, I was working from home because it was COVID. He was working from home, but then he was going to be home full time. He used to go out one day a week to the office. And so I do remember thinking he was going to be gone one day. And I'm like, well, this is my only chance. And I don't know if we can get more into it, but I had contacted, the only person was a colleague at work that I had confided in. And I had just said, hey, I can leave today. I have nowhere to take my cats. And she said I could at least keep them in her laundry room. She had a couple other pets though. So I had to keep them there briefly. And then I don't know how far you want me to go into the story, but I can go from there as far as my story, if you'd like me to.
If you would like to take some time, a little bit about your story, that's okay.
Okay. So, and then what happened at that point, I had decided I was going to go into a shelter. That wasn't my original plan. Like I said, this was very last minute. I had been kind of preparing. I had been talking to an advocate for about 2 months. And so I had some papers set aside. I had some money, all my important documents, those types of things. And I do remember calling my kids, and they were like helping me by the phone because I really was in a state of shock, I think, at the time. I did get my 2 cats over to my colleague and friend's house. However, then she goes, well, I just talked to someone, like she talked to her church, and she goes, I think you should go to the shelter because you'll get more services. But so I contacted the local shelter that I was at the time, and they said I could bring my cats. But when I got there, and now I also was immunocompromised at the time, and there was going to be 3 women in a room and my 2 cats that I'm like, so I couldn't do it. And I said, I'm just going back. I'm going back. And then they ended up I called my kids, and then they also my kids told me, we'll pay for a hotel, just go to a hotel. The cats are with, your friend. And he did go over, he knew where my friend was. And so he did go over there. Thankfully, they were in the basement. He didn't know they were over there, and I was not there at the time. But the next day I did, my daughters kept calling everywhere, and they finally got a hold of a place called Day One that was in the Twin Cities. And they connected me with the Joint Shelter Program, which Women's Advocates was also a part of. I think all the shelters at that time, because of COVID, were all working together. And so it was at a motel. so I was able to go down there again. I couldn't have my cats there. And so I had an advocate at the time, and she just worked tirelessly for like 3 weeks. And during this time, there's so many other things that are taking place.
So many other barriers, I'm sure, with all the
Yeah,
barriers that you already
right,
encountered through this process.
right. And I was working full time, and I didn't take off. So I was able to work from, the apartment, but in between, there's times I remember just crying, like put it on mute, and I'd be on the floor and put my, because I didn't really, I had a lot going on. And so she was working on the pet front, and she finally got a hold of Red Rover, was actually the group at that time. And they agreed to, again, board my cats and stuff, but I was really worried I just didn't want them just in a cage. I knew that they were, but I was able to find a place that was able to take some rates, and they paid for everything. Like they paid for the shots, because they needed to have their all shots updated and had to have a recent exam and everything. And so they did all that. And I was at shelter for about 4 to 5 months. And so I would FaceTime. They were nice enough to let me FaceTime with my cats and stuff. So
Aw.
yeah.
Paula, I'm wondering what improvements you feel like could be made to the process of housing animals with people when survivors are escaping abuse.
Well, I just think pets are such a high percentage of people have pets, number one. I think it's a known, and it's a known thing that abusers are going to use those pets to coerce either people, women, spouses back, or do something worse, or any ways to punish them. And so I do think it should just be part of an intake. My desire or hope, I guess, for the future would be that that animals can be brought in with women or men who are being abused, and that they can have a safe place for their animals, along with their children and themselves. And so whether that's setting up maybe some pet areas, or I just know that my cats, I was pretty isolated too at the time. And it was really, really difficult to be separated from them.
I'm sure, I can't even imagine.
So I think that's the biggest thing. I think when people, or when there's intake, again, I think we were going in the right direction with getting foster parents. And I think that's great. I mean, that's a good alternative, but my ultimate goal would be that pets can stay with the owners. And then they are part of the whole family. So,
Of course, being a part of that healing process is so important for both
right.
the animals and the humans.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Women's Advocates has a survivor advisory council. Can you tell us a little bit about how that council works?
Did you want to start with that, Holly, or do you want me to?
I can
wanna-
start, and then
Yeah,
you
yeah, you
can
go ahead.
add your experience and perspective. So Women's Advocates is a survivor-led organization, I think at all levels of our organization. Like we mentioned, I am a survivor. Our associate director is a survivor. We also have many board members and staff that carry lived experience. And of course, we have our Survivor Advisory Council. So all former Women's Advocates program participants are invited to join our Survivor Advisory Council, which actually meets fairly regularly. It's like definitely monthly. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 times a month, just depending on kind of what we're working on. We try to have like funner in-person meetup times as it fits with people's lives and schedules. And attending different events and things. But, we meet regularly to discuss programming and services at Women's Advocates. More recently, the last 2 years, we've worked on policy priorities, and really they're participating and helping with the overall direction of the organization. We do pay survivors for their time and their knowledge and their expertise, and recognize that their contributions are really vital to the work that we do and to other folks who are accessing our programs and services. So Paula, anything you want to add with your own time on the council?
Yeah, so I've been on the council since it started. I know we had a little bit of a rough beginning, but then we did finally get cohesive, and we were really, I'm always amazed at how much, Holly, that like you and Jake take into account what we say or what our experience is. And so a lot of times, even at like the beginning of this year, we talk about what our work agenda is going to be for the year. And originally when I came on, I remember the pet thing was one of the first things I had brought up. I really didn't think it would go as far as it did, so I'm thrilled about that. I think it was definitely a need, that there's a need out there for that. The other thing about the Survivory Council, I think for me, is also that it gave me confidence. You know, when you go through an abusive relationship and that type of trauma, I had no idea, like, you know, I'm still healing from it, but it's 2 years. It took me a good 2 years to really not be reacting or being triggered or things like that. So for me, one of the things is I really did have a sense of worthlessness from that experience. And so knowing, I think also the fact that you pay, like with the, you know, with the gift, whether it's with gift cards or whatever, that was like an acknowledgement that you matter, your expertise matters. And I think because of that, it's also helped me speak in front of groups. I've attended like some homelessness conferences, you know, that was a Minnesota State homeless conference. I've had just some opportunities arise that I would not have had otherwise. And then in addition, we come up with ideas on things that we want to do. So whether it's, I think we had welcome baskets that we worked on, and we talked about things that would have been nice to have in there. You know, coming in as an abused, you know, as a survivor. And then just things, even like when we were getting started on our own, and we talked about all sorts of things, whether it was legal, we need more legal things, or different avenues, like with even getting help with the divorce. I know I had a really hard time. I had like my attorney and stuff also did not work out at first. And I actually was getting, she was re-triggering. It was re-triggering for me every time she would talk to me, because it seemed like she just wanted to settle and there's nothing. But anyways, so they, you know, even help with that part of it. And so there's all these different avenues, you know, the mental health, if someone has an addiction, all these other areas that women who have gone through it can speak about.
So I love,
and I don't want to leave. So I'm like, I want to just keep kind of, it's just been a great experience. And I really grow from it. And I can see other women that come to it and start, and they might be really quiet. And then it's just nice to see them evolve through time.
I love that. And you're clearly are comfortable speaking in front of groups now. You're doing a wonderful job here. And I love that you were also compensated for your time. That's a really important issue for sure. If you're giving your expertise, it's important to be compensated for that. So I'm so excited to hear that that's happening. When you joined the coalition, you immediately or very soon after you felt comfortable speaking and participating, brought up the pet issue. And I know that from there's been a Minnesota Pet Coalition that was formed specifically to address these barriers that survivors face when they're leaving an abusive situation. Do either you or Holly want to talk a bit about how that coalition was formed?
You can go ahead, Holly, if you want to talk a little bit about the beginning of that.
Yeah. So one of the work plan items was to help figure out a solution for the exact things that Paula has brought up, and so that was really making sure that we can safely house pets, and you know, long term for us that will be keeping the full family unit, including the animal relatives, with everyone. But so, you know, originally we connected with the Bond Between and just said, hey, there's this need. Is there a way that our organizations can partner? We recognize that that there's a barrier for people accessing shelter because of their pets. And they were really excited, and we started reaching out to their foster kind of pool of people. And then Women's Advocates actually pulled our donor list, and we reached out to everyone who's given to our organization and asked folks if they would be interested in being either a short-term or a long-term foster for folks who were, accessing shelter services, or if they needed more time when they were transitioning into our housing stability program. From that, I think I want to say like summer or fall of 2023, the bond between Four Winds Connections and Women's Advocates met. Marlu, who is like the main person with Four Winds Connections and now happens to be a board member a couple years later, had also invited some like animal welfare folks, a couple veterinarians who were a part of the University of Minnesota Vet School that were doing work in tribal communities here. And then a student initiative for veterinarian services. And so really, Marlu kind of brought a group of folks together. We did introductions. And, in that meeting, the largest kind of need was for urgent fosters within the first 72 hours when someone was accessing shelter. And organically, kind of from grassroots relationships and trust building, we kept meeting to brainstorm different ideas on how we can best do this work to meet the needs of survivors. And so we ended up reaching out to Cornerstone and Tubman, who are the two other largest shelter providers for DV survivors in Minnesota. And then the Animal Humane Society here in Minnesota. And we kind of convened to understand what gaps they were seeing. And that we knew, we really just figured we could do this work better if we all came together. And so I think after meeting regularly for a number of months, it was early 2024 when we kind of naturally formed into a coalition and decided that we were going to name ourselves a coalition and then kind of start working out some of the logistical pieces related to funding and fiscal sponsorship. And now we have, the intention of really growing support to every victim survivor in shelter across Minnesota. I know we just, there's maybe one or two other DV providers who are interested in joining the coalition as well, in more rural Minnesota up north as well. And I also just really want to name Jake DeVera, who's our associate director, who has really put so much work into this pet coalition. And then Marlu, who I mentioned, have been really two folks who have really helped build all of the relationships to form this and make it a reality for the work that we're doing.
I love the way you were able to work closely with the animal welfare organizations. Was that a smooth process, or were there challenges that you faced while creating this coalition?
Yeah, I think what was really helpful is that we started off very relationship heavy, right? Like it was a lot of meeting, building relationships, building trust between leaders of all of these organizations, knowing that we had a shared vision to make sure that survivors didn't have to make a decision to stay in an abusive relationship because of their pet or having to leave a pet behind. I think we were really intentional about who we invited to be a part of the kind of original group of organizations that were engaged in kind of really, starting or piloting this work. I think we are all really fluid and flexible, and we just are really mindful in treating each other with grace and respect, and understanding that this is the first coalition. Like, it's unique in the sense that, like, I'm not a veterinarian. I am not going to have the same skill set and understanding that veterinarian will have as it relates to the pet health, and so it's really just creating those trusting relationships. And I think a lot of folks have just been really moved by the story of supporting victim survivors. And so, you know, like, we haven't had too many challenges because we've all just kind of stepped into this with that same shared vision and that same approach with one another. And I think, one of the other unique things that has been helpful is just kind of people recognizing, like, where their strengths are in this collaboration, right? So the coalition as a whole, there are certain organizations that offer dog training and cat behavior support to all of the fosters, veterinarian care, supplies are provided, right? So it's really people really recognizing and taking a back seat when a domestic violence service provider needs to say, hey, this is how we need to do this, and vice versa. So yeah, we've been fortunate to learn together, and I think at this point we haven't had any huge challenges. It's just a learning process, and we're going with the flow and adapting.
And I was just going to add, one of the things I think too is that the fact that there's so much support for the foster parents, you know what I mean? Like, they can have help if there's behavior issues or anything else. They are allotted the food and all the supplies and anything they need to help take care of this pet. So I really think that's a wonderful, another part of this whole and it is a coalition.
Yeah. I mean, it's a coalition, and like Holly said, it's a very unique coalition. We don't see a lot of coalitions that are animal welfare with homeless services combined. And so it is really unique and wonderful. Truly, it's a beautiful thing. So I'm wondering, what are some action items that people can take if they want to start a similar coalition in their community? In particular, you mentioned fiscal sponsorships, and I'm wondering what organizations are helping to support this coalition and how people could maybe get financial support for coalitions of this type, and maybe also what kinds of things the funding is used for.
Yeah,
I know that.
Yeah, Red Rover has been a huge support. And we also actually have some federal funding that is supporting the work. I think if folks are interested in starting like a similar coalition in their community, the Minnesota Pet Coalition is 100% interested in connecting with others, like, in the United States and beyond. I know there is an organization, it's called the National Link Coalition, and they have some really great resources on their website. I don't think I can put it in the chat, but I can send it to you all to send that out. And yeah, I mean, I think we would all be interested in meeting with folks and kind of talking through things. I think some of the stuff that funding gets used for, we are providing almost like case management services to survivors who have a pet, like Paula noted, for sometimes that's like training, if they're if there needs to be like updated vaccinations, if there needs to be, you know, spay or neutering, if there is a health condition with the pet, like all of those things. We even have dollars that are available for like cleaning fees if a pet has an incident, right? So there's all sorts of kind of things that we have that we try to account for, food, different pet supplies, leashes, you know, all of the things. And then there is a little bit of staff time for like some of the folks who are doing that kind of direct case management with folks and making sure that the pet gets placed somewhere and that's that there's that transparency with the owner, survivor, and all of those moving pieces as well. And we can also give folks our website. It's just www.mnpetcoalition.org. But again, I can send those to My Dog Is My Home, and you guys can all send them out after if that works best.
Thank you.
Next year, Women's Advocates is opening a pet-friendly shelter. What can you tell us about that project?
Yeah, so right now we are doing a capital campaign. Funny time to do that. But essentially in 2023, we kind of realized a long time organizational goal to really expand our shelter and service capacity. The state of Minnesota actually had some capital funding from the Department of Human Services Office of Economic Opportunity. It's a mouthful. So we were able to go after some shelter acquisition funding, and we were awarded $8.7 million for a shelter capital grant to purchase 2 apartment buildings in another neighborhood here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we are still in the kind of design phase. We are working with our Survivor Advisory Council to identify exactly how this building needs to be designed. But I mean, we will be converting these buildings into 1, 2, and 3 bedroom emergency shelter units. And for like once this project is completed, it will actually increase the number of domestic violence shelter beds by 56% in the state or in Ramsey County, St. Paul, Minnesota. The buildings will offer kind of a mix of ADA compliant rooms as I mentioned. But each unit will be its own apartment. And so folks kind of have autonomy over their own space. And it will be like the intentional thinking behind all of this in partnership with our Survivor Advisory Council is for these buildings to provide diverse accommodations for survivors of all genders, sexualities, and abilities. And then of course, that this will be a place that allows victim survivors and their pets to live together in their rooms, making sure that, you know, there's that support during times of crisis and keeping the whole family together and safe. We do have a grant from Red Rover. They're sponsoring like a pet run. We will also have like you know, like a pet bathing area and some other pet friendly spaces. So we're super excited about that. But that's a little bit about that new project that we're embarking on. The hope is that it's functional, up and running by 2027. So we're on our way.
You are on your way. And I love that the Survivor Advisory Council has been taking such a role in terms of helping with how it would be best laid out for people's comfort and support when they're coming for the survivors. So that's wonderful that they've been able to take a role in helping that to be set up in a way that's comfortable for survivors. We have some slides that we're going to show of Paula's pets. So I'm really excited to share that while we're looking at these, and I'm going to let Paula explain to us who everyone is. But before we do that, I just want to really quick remind people that if you have questions, we are going to take questions and answers after this. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section of Whova. And then after we look at these slides, we'll move on to everyone's questions. Thank you.
Well, this is Paula again, and I'll just tell you, this is Stella. So she will turn 21 in June. So I've had her that long, and she is just as spry as can be. I mean, for her age and stuff, she still is quite funny, loves to play, and curls up on my head at night and likes to be by me, and very friendly, where she was not that way when I had 4 animals. Like, she would hiss at people, but she's become very friendly and very vocal. And then on the left here, these 2 pictures on the left were taken by a Star Tribune photographer. They also did a story on the coalition. And so I was able to be part of that and interviewed with that. So we can go on to the next slide. And then on the left, this just kind of shows where I would, this is Stella when she was in shelter. During the time that I was in shelter. And so, like I said, Red Rover had helped me at the time and helped pay for the sporting, and the employees were just great. They got this really big room. I was really concerned, and they like had a better area than they would have had with me. So they had all these things to run on, and they had just lots of stuff to do. So you can go to the next slide. And then this is Penny. And so the one on the right, that was at the shelter she was at. It was this huge room that had, like I said, lots of things to climb on for them, but also lasers and lots of toy things. So, and she was just a big little bellied cat at the time. So since then she has passed away, but I was thrilled to have the time that I did have with her after shelter. So it was very comforting. You can go to the next slide. And then this is just, then I got into an apartment, and this just shows Stella and Penny kind of on there. This is my own cat stand or whatever that they always were on. And Penny was always on the bottom, Stella would be on the top, and then the other side is where they're playing with some laser thing my daughters sent me after I got back to my new apartment. So, and then these were my 2 doggies that I lost back in 2018 and then 2020 February. But this is Maggie and Woody, and they have their own stories. All 4 of my animals were rescue animals. You can go to the next slide. And just a few more pictures of them together. Very sweet. And then this is Stella and Penny. And then if you go to the very last one, this was, they were in shelter over Christmas time. And so the employees were nice enough to make a Christmas card and had sent that to me as well. So I thought that was really sweet.
That is sweet. All of your pets are beautiful. And this is a conference where people can show their pets as much as possible. We all love seeing them. So besides this, don't forget about we have the photo contest. So please share pictures of your pets so that we can all smile. I'm going to go ahead to the questions and answers now. And we do have a few questions for you guys. The first one is, how can social service workers help survivors? What do you all want to see more of? What do you need?
Boy, I think when number one, I really did need the mental health therapy. That was an important component. I do have to say that the advocate I was pretty distraught and traumatized when I got in this position. I'm, people, it doesn't matter what your economic situation is, doesn't matter anything. There's abuse everywhere. You know what I mean? It doesn't discriminate against socioeconomic. So in some ways, I also, I just needed support. I did have one of the advocates I had, I think my like I said, I really was a shell of a person when I got in there. I did not know anything about myself. And so I think just that part of it took longer as far as the healing part of it. It was very helpful to have the support of not just advocates, but also some other women. I had a little bit unique situation in that it was during COVID. So that was another, I was isolated. And so that was, was difficult during that time. I do have to say when I definitely needed help monetarily wise, just getting into a new apartment. I had taken care of all our bills and stuff, but to get divorced, I basically I just gave up most everything and just started new. And so it was a really not just humbling experience, but it was just I needed new furniture, so thankfully where I'm at, they were able, we have some organizations out there that donate furniture, like bridging was one of the areas that helped me with that, getting a down payment, for the apartment. And I did have a full-time job during that time, so I wanted to make sure that I kept that, and they were thankfully very helpful, with that as well. The company that I worked with, they were very accommodating. Like I said, I'm 2 hours away, but I'm still working remotely, and I had health issues too as well. So there's always a combination of things. So as far as services, those are just some of the things that I face.
No, that's really helpful. It's sort of the combination between the practical things and then the mental health support. So I think that's really a very helpful answer. Thank you. Some of the questions we have are about funding. One of them is someone's asking, what was the federal funding stream that you have? I don't know if Holly can address that.
I will have to give me 1 second to double check on that, but I believe it was through hold on. It was OVC funding, and it was called Emergency and Transitional Pet Shelter and Housing Assistant Grant Program.
Okay. Thank you. I think there was, I'm going to look here. Sorry, I think there was another funding question. Okay, I'm not seeing that now. So I'm going to say what the next question is, aside from funding, what has been the biggest barrier to helping clients engage with services?
I think we've been really adaptive in the work that we do here. We are, I think, like Paula mentioned, we have seen much higher, essentially, I would say over the past couple of years, we've seen higher needs with folks experiencing mental health or crisis kind of happening in shelter, needing to have folks de-escalate. We do have mental health counselors and therapists on staff at Women's Advocates, and I think that has been huge for survivors and just for all of our staff who are doing regular advocacy work, but then also needing to help folks kind of along that healing journey. We have also seen a significant increase of survivors who are maybe dealing with chemical health, and understandably so. But we also actually hired, and this was a direct ask from our Survivor Advisory Council. We sought out funding, and we actually have LADC, which is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor on staff now, who's able to work with folks who have chemical health questions, concerns, regardless of where they're at on that path and that journey. We really do take a non-judgmental approach, and You know, we really are trauma-informed, strengths-based programs that you know, allow for survivors to have as much voice in their care as possible, because when exiting or experiencing domestic violence, those choices and that voice has been taken, right? And so we want to do the opposite and make sure that folks have autonomy in what their care looks like, and you know, they're their own experts of their own experience.
If I may, Holly, I also wanted to say that I love hearing all of the work you have and support you have, because also going into shelter, being homeless is also traumatizing. And I don't think people really realize that. So I love hearing all the support you have just going right into shelter, because it that's what we need the most.
I love
I'm just gonna say the other thing with that, Elizabeth, is also, I remember going into shelter. I had a hard time just taking the food. I said, I don't, this, I just had never really been in that position. And I remember someone just talking to me and they're like, you worked, you pay taxes, please just take the food, it'll go in the garbage otherwise. So she was very good about that. And I think that was also just a really, like I said, it was hard for me to even ask for help to begin with, much less than be in that situation where I'm having to rely on others. But it
And
also,
just
like I said, was very good for me in a lot of ways, and helped me with my healing journey.
And just the transition, like you said, you couldn't even comprehend with your mind at that time, going from
Hmm.
this one traumatic experience, leaving this abusive situation, but then again, having to leave everything behind that you've ever known and had,
Yeah.
including your pets, to go into a shelter. That's also
Hmm.
another traumatic experience. So I say
Yeah.
kudos to women advocates for having on-site mental health.
Yes. And also the other thing I'd like to point out is we need more education. Like I said, I was in this marriage for a long time, and I've gone to therapy for lots of things, and I probably come across as a very confident woman. And so I don't know, but my therapist was always like, why aren't you saying this? I go, I did say that to him. And this is what happened. And I don't think she ever even recognized it as abuse. And after I went in, I remember saying something to her because I was really mad. I remember afterwards, because I don't know, somebody connected me with an advocate, and I was telling her some of the things, and she's like, no, that's abuse. That's abuse. Like, it, yes, that's, because it was a lot of emotional stuff. Um, and so I just think education at a younger age is really, I remember a lot of us talking about that, like, had we even learned this in the high school or junior high, or, just to have our own self-worth. And, even if someone's doing, there's just a lot to go in there psychologically. Um, and so I think education's a big piece. And also, there was one other thing I was going to mention, but I can't. If I think of it, I'll bring it up again. But
Yeah, jump in, definitely jump in if you think about
okay.
it. We have about 5 more minutes, and we do have a question in the Q&A that actually I feel like it really flows from this nicely, given that we're talking about trauma and the feelings of trauma going into shelter. This is, I work for Animal Services, and while we work with a DV shelter that allows for co-sheltering, many survivors report that the location feels unsafe. How can we advocate for safer spaces for survivors, right? And part of trauma-informed care is obviously having a safe emotional and physical place. So I just found that to be a really interesting question. I'm wondering what you guys think.
So, well, I just by that question, what is it that they're saying that they feel? Why do they feel unsafe? I guess that
Well,
would be the question.
Maybe
okay.
some staff, maybe. I mean, from my personal
It says the
experience, Paula,
location.
The
It
I've
says
had some
the
location.
report
incidents
that
with
the
staff that made me
location
feel
feels
uncomfortable.
unsafe. So
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
where the shelter is just not a place that the survivors feel safe being.
Yes.
So how
Maybe.
can we advocate for safer spaces is the question.
So the thing that I would mention is, even like when we were looking at where we wanted to purchase these 2 new buildings, we purposely picked like it's not like a bougie neighborhood, right? But it's a nice neighborhood. Our existing shelter spaces in the Summit Hill neighborhood down the street from the governor's office, right? Or governor's mansion, right? And we were very intentional about wanting to have our shelters in locations that we're a little bit removed from other areas where some of our survivors might be coming from, and wanting to help with just some of the geographical safety pieces. But they're also still like accessible by bus. They're still, in in spaces that are okay to access. Again, I would go back to survivor feedback, right? I think it's really important to hear from folks with lived experience. Paula's question, that was literally my question, like, what about it isn't safe? What can the staff do from feedback from survivors who are staying in that space to take action to make sure that there's additional safety that's built in? Like, is that hiring a community-based security program that's doing rounds to help if they're concerned about police presence? Is it adding more security cameras and a different type of security system? Is it adding additional staff? Like, is it a higher fence, right? I think there's a lot of different things that you can consider when factoring in safety. If you can't physically like move the building to a new location, I think there's a lot of things that you can do to increase safety. And I think it really starts with staff listening to folks who are accessing programs and services there.
I think that's a great point. I think it also just in general, people have a right to quality housing too, right? So it's not just a right to housing, but it's also a right to quality housing. And so I think that question just makes me think almost back to Ryan and what he was talking about earlier, in his session regarding what people deserve. And that people deserve quality housing. And so we have 1 minute left, which is not a lot of time, but there is one more question that maybe could be handled quickly, which is, do people whose pets are being fostered have direct contact with pet foster parents? And if not, how do you handle the communication and updates?
So currently there is a confidentiality clause for most people where fosters are actually signing off saying that this will be confidential. If a survivor requests to meet the foster because they want to make sure that their pet will be safe, there is that option as well. But for the most part, we try to keep like the case manager being the person who kind of goes between the survivor and the foster to ensure that confidentiality happens. I know that some people have a certain preference and others, want to make sure that they're fully confidential. And I don't know if that was different from when you were involved with the program too, Paula.
Well, so what I was at, just because of COVID, I couldn't go visit. Otherwise, I had a car at the time, so I would have driven over there. But no, so that's why I did the FaceTiming. And I definitely would have been one of the people, let me see the place and let me meet the people who are going to take care of my pets. Because that's the whole issue, is they've been with me so long that and not that I was bougie about it or anything either, but that I did have a certain expectation of what they deserve. And I also think
a lot of anxiety, not knowing where they are.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say, the other thing that really helped me was aftercare, just meaning that even when I was transitioning into an apartment, like I was allowed like a stipend to help me with my rent, and it gradually went down over a year. So it wasn't like this big cutoff from here to here. I always had contact still with the shelter. I still had outside of the pet thing. I just mean that also helped with transitioning.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. This session was amazing. I think we all learned a lot. There's a couple questions I didn't get to, so if you have a chance, maybe later circle back to the question and answer session from your in Huva, and maybe you'll be able to answer those. But we got to most of them. Now it is time for our break. So if you guys could please join us back at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time and 11:15 Pacific Standard Time for story time, a reading of Lost and Found Cats. It's going to be an amazing session. I'm personally really looking forward to it, and we can't wait to see you there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
As well.
Thanks, everyone. Giga Wabaman, take care.